Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm Sean Haney from RealAgriculture.com. You can find more episodes of this podcast by going to MindYourFarmBusiness.com. Today we have a very special guest joining us, Mark Gasparotto. Mark is a leadership expert who focuses on what he calls the inner game. Now, as farmers and ranchers, we're no strangers to dealing with complex and unpredictable challenges, from market fluctuations to weather extremes and everything in between. Managing these variables effectively starts with managing ourselves. Mark is president of the Gasparotto Group. It's a boutique agency that provides clients with customized, pragmatic, and evidence-based leadership solutions. Mark combines his 10-plus years of entrepreneurial experience, 20-plus years of uniformed service as a combat engineer officer, and masters of leadership to deliver impactful and practical leadership insights for over 1,000 clients. Mark's insights into the inner game of leadership are incredibly relevant for anyone running a farm business. We'll explore how understanding our own beliefs, values, and traits can form the foundation of successful leadership. Additionally, we're going to discuss how our consciousness, how we think and feel, along with our action orientation, which is how we execute and make decisions, plays a crucial role in how we lead. By mastering these internal aspects, we can enhance our decision-making, our resilience, and overall success in our farm businesses. So without further ado, let's dive into the insightful conversation. Here's Mark Gasparotto. Mark, welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast.
Sean, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about what you've coined the inner game as it applies to leadership. So I guess right off the top, we got a lot of farm business owners, managers, people running, businesses with a lot of complexity on a daily basis, facing a lot of variables throughout the, when you're producing livestock or throughout the growing season. What exactly is the inner game?
So there's some fundamental things that I believe are true from a leadership perspective, and some of that's based on some academics that I've done, but largely my experiences leading soldiers, 2 decades in the combat engineers, some of which on operations in combat especially. So to lead others effectively starts with leading yourself. In fact, to do anything effectively, including your own work. So as an individual contributor, as a team member, or as a leader, starts with leading yourself. So I didn't coin the term inner game. It's floating out there, but I use it interchangeably with this concept of leadership of self. And for me, it's in 3 buckets. And so there's this part about your identity, so your beliefs, values, and your traits. So like who you are, and that's the why of your leadership. So the why, the what, and the how, if you will, but that provides the foundation upon which everything else is built. And the other 2 buckets would be your consciousness, or how you think and feel. And that's made up of sense making, so how you make sense of the world, how you take in information, your emotional intelligence, and also how you learn. And the last bucket would be your action orientation, or how you execute, how you do things. And that involves decision-making, accountability, and resilience. So it's the internal part of leadership, what goes on in your head, your heart, your gut, before you engage with the outside world, with other stakeholders. So it's not about the communication, the team building, the trust building, the coaching, feedback, all of those leadership in teams elements. And I think the only other thing I'd want to say is, leadership can be a defined role, right? So you are a leader in the hierarchy and you have direct reports. But frankly, it's also a set of behaviors. And because leadership of self is so important, even for individual contributors, everyone is a leader, right? Because they need to lead themselves, or there may be times when um, they're not the top, they're not the boss in the hierarchy, but they have the most competencies to either provide advice or make a decision or to actually do the work. And so in the most nimble of teams, there's something called dynamic subordination, where someone at the front lines may have the greatest competency to lead that particular part. So I want everyone to think of themselves in terms of being a leader. And some definitions of leadership are you're a leader if people want to follow you. And so there's this notion of followership. And the best leaders are also very good followers, because they know when other people should be given that role or that opportunity to lead. So I think I went beyond the question you asked me.
It makes sense.
But that's I think that's a pretty good introduction to the concept of this leadership of self, or inner game.
Yeah. So as you were talking about that and contrasting, inner game versus, just outer game. And I think a lot of times in leadership, we jump to the outer game part of it, right? We celebritize some leaders, we celebritize or romanticize about certain behaviors that a leader may or may not have. I feel if that's all we focus on, there's some consequences to that. And really, I would think one of the ultimate consequences would be ineffective leadership because we actually don't know what, as you broke it down, identity, consciousness, and action. We kind of got to figure out our own stuff first before we can actually find what kind of leader we want to be.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that's a great replay. And analogy that I would use is, so when we see a successful business person, a successful entrepreneur, we just see that person in the moment, shining, earning, top line, bottom line, whatever it is, but we don't see all the sacrifice that went into getting there. And so when we see the outer game, and unless someone's explicitly telling them what's going on inside of them, really, you only see that outer game, right? Unless you're having a philosophical or reflective conversation with someone. But it is realizing that it's the inner game of leadership that drives that outer game of success. So whether it's individual productivity or team performance or organizational profitability, it's something I call that the chain of impact. But it all starts from mastering your inner game. And so from the strength of that leadership of self, that provides the foundation upon which you can have a successful outer game.
So, okay, so if we bought into this and we're like, okay, inner game, I got this. I need to work on it. What are some of the tools or the processes that one should go through? And can you give us some of your experiences in terms of how you sort of figured out for yourself?
Well, it was a journey, without a doubt, to figure it out. And what we've seen, it's not my research, but what a lot of research has shown is the best leaders typically aren't under the age of 40. It just took them that long, walking this earth, being given various opportunities to lead, and it's a craft. Yeah, there's a science to it, there's an art to it, but it really is a craft in terms of how you experiment. So I recently read Gandhi's autobiography, and the subtitle is His Experiments with Truth. And that really resonated with me in terms of my experiments with leadership. While I have a lot of academic grounding in the topic, and I've certainly been trained and developed in my 2 decades in the Army to be a leader, it's really my experiments that have allowed me to figure out the higher end of it, right? The nuance of it, the context of it. And for me, it starts with self-awareness. If it's very hard to work on your inner game if you're not self-aware.
Right.
So there's various exercises. It could be 360 assessments. It could be asking for feedback. I'm fond of Myers-Briggs to know your personality type. I'm fond of other leadership 360 assessments, because then it's not just you looking at yourself, because everyone has a blind spot or blind spots. And so these assessments allow you to shine a light and for other people to shine a light on what's going on inside of you, because that's driving how you show up. So self-awareness is the first step in any coaching program, really, in most leadership development programs. And then from there, you want to look at your strengths and your areas for development. And as I went through the 9 components earlier, right, in those 3 buckets,
Yeah.
I think emotional intelligence is a big part of it, because we really need to grow into that, and we will grow cognitively before we grow emotionally, for most people, at any rate.
Yeah.
I would say men especially. And if you've got sons and daughters, you just see your girls develop much more quickly than boys do. There's a reason why the alcohol age in the States is 21, because it's all about the prefrontal cortex, taking years to develop before you want to subject it to alcohol. Perhaps that's a rabbit hole that I've gone down, or a tangent, but it just, even physiologically, we have not developed, or the brain is not developed until the early 20s. So there is this journey of physical growth that matches cognitive growth, which matches emotional growth. And so I think that's pretty important. And then the other one I want to highlight is accountability. So I talked about 9 of these components. I think accountability is the first among equal, or the prima inter pares for those who like Latin expressions, because people who are accountable, truly accountable, will work on the other things if they're not naturally gifted there. And so if someone isn't accountable, they're very hard to train, and they're impossible to coach. I would say almost impossible to coach. And they're not going to learn anything above and beyond what they absolutely need to. So for me, accountability is very important. And then when you pair that with self-awareness, you start to see a path. And if people have a vision in terms of where they want to go, how they want to grow, how much they want to grow, then, and if they're accountable, they'll have that journey of discovery. And those are the clients I love to work with.
Yeah. Well, I can see why. So I just want to go back to being self-aware.
Yes.
How do I know if I'm actually really truly self-aware? Because you could be in front of a group of people and you can say, well, are you self-aware? Oh, I think I'm self-aware. Oh, I think I'm self-aware. We could self-evaluate and say, yeah, of course I am. But in some cases, probably not. So how do I truly know if I'm actually self-aware?
But this is where a 360, or, as you and I experienced together, a very simple assessment or exercise, something called the Johari window, where you have a list of things. You can pick traits, you can pick communication styles, you can pick values. I mean, you can pick anything you want. The more concrete or tangible, the better. And then you would say, this is how I think I show up. Or you would select these attributes, okay, these traits. And then you would ask for feedback. How do others see you show up? And then it all gets plotted. What's known to self, known to others, not known to self, not known to others. You've got your classic 2x2 matrix.
Yep.
And then that gives you feedback. So I don't think you can know how self-aware you are until you've tested the assumption or the hypotheses with other people. And but I would suggest those people who journal, those people who are naturally reflective, those people who are active listeners and ask a lot of questions of people, they're more prone to be, or they'll have a higher degree of self-awareness than those who don't exhibit those characteristics. So I can tell you, as a young man, where I had strong opinions, strongly held, and I liked to tell people about it, and I wasn't a good listener. I think I was a smart guy, but emotionally intelligent, like there was some pretty big gaps there. I was not aware about how I was showing up because I assumed people saw the world the way I did. That was a very wrong assumption. And so it wasn't until my I'd say mid 20s that and I got some pretty stark feedback. People would say, "Mark, you're not the leader you think you are," or like,
Ooh,
yeah, and but I had enough humility after like getting punched in the face to like, okay, I think they have a point here, and so going on that journey of reflection and asking for that feedback was very important for me. And so now, I like to have strong opinions loosely held.
I like that.
And I didn't come up with that saying, but it allows you to, accept the fact that you could be wrong, that you may need help, that there are other perspectives out there, and I don't have a strong opinion about everything. And some things, like I really don't know. I'm happy to sit on the fence and take it all in. But the things that I'm passionate about and have a strong belief in, I still want to remain open to the fact that there's other ways of seeing it.
Yeah.
And as I've served around the world, like Afghanistan, Bosnia, Haiti, so even just like from a geographic perspective, and the cultures that come from these different places in the world, I mean, they see the world very differently. And I've had to, and when I'm a guest in their country, especially, you've got to really consider your worldview.
And if your reaction to that 360 feedback, or asking somebody, hey, do I really do this? Is this, somebody told me I do this. Do I really do this? And the answer is not favorable to your behavior, or that vision you had of yourself. If your first reaction is defensive and not sort of self-reflective, that probably tells you something about some growth that you have as a leader, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And so to me, that speaks to your emotional intelligence, in particular around impulse control. And so it's okay to have those emotions. It's okay to have those impulses, right? Those are all signals from the body. It's what you then do with them. And so can you pause, not visibly react, and reflect upon those things? And there's all sorts of techniques that we teach kids in terms of self-regulation that I think adults, many adults would benefit a reminder from.
We'll get back to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, but first a word from our sponsor, RBC Royal Bank.
This episode of Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. Maybe you've had an idea about upgrading your operation, or finally getting that renovation done, or buying some new equipment. Or you want to be a little less reliant on the weather from season to season. Get some help making it happen by speaking with an RBC Agriculture account manager. Then, set up an investment plan to make even more of your ideas happen. Visit rbc.com/chartyourcourse and get started today.
So all of this makes sense. How does the complexity of the situation that a leader is dealing with, how does that add a whole nother dimension to this challenge of trying to really up their inner game?
Well, the more complexity you have, or if you're operating in crisis, Like that's really going to pressure test who you are as a person. And so what happens to a lot of people when they're put under that kind of pressure, either in the moment or if it's if it's over an extended period of time, they tend to revert to their base personality.
Okay.
Right? They tend to the preferences that they have in terms of how they see the world, how they make decisions, how they interact, like that is all on display. And if they haven't worked on their resilience, and if they haven't worked on their emotional intelligence, those two things in particular, or if they don't know what they believe in and value, right? Because a lot of people, when nothing else makes sense, if you can revert back to what you believe, then you know, and a belief is something you know to be true, even if nothing else makes sense around you, then you'll behave in a certain way. So I think for leaders, it requires a certain amount of inoculation, right? This is part of the journey, the growing, or that learning curve, right? And through growth. In fact, I just read an article in the New York Times it was at the societal level. But I'm going to make the connection. Societies that have faced hardship, famine, drought, and other things have been more resilient the next time those things have happened. And I think that just scales from an individual level. So if you want to be resilient, you got to do hard things, right? You can't click your way to resilience. You can't just watch a podcast. Like you've got to experiment with these things. You got to put them into practice. You got to go out and do hard things. And I imagine most people, if they're in agriculture, are used to doing hard things, right? So like, or if you're an entrepreneur, you're used to doing hard things. So that's how you get there. It's by practicing your craft, and it's through this cycle of. So this is about the learning now. I really like the adult learning model, where you start with a little bit of theory. So like the things we're talking about now, right? This is the theory. You then experiment with them. Right? Or you start with theory, you reflect upon it. Then you experiment with it. You reflect upon it. Then you try it out for real. You get feedback in the real world, the market, the community. You reflect upon it. And that's how you learn. And that's how you continually get better.
But you've hit on there that even the most experienced of leaders still probably not perfect. You're constantly in these periods of growth.
Yes, you are. And I think of even what I learn by virtue of doing my workshops and the questions that I'm asked, right? Like the questions you're asking me today. And so I don't think I have perfect answers for every single question, because I haven't thought about it in every single context. And even if you understand something in one context, when you apply it to the next one, right, in complexity, or a different kind of complexity, there's going to be nuances to it. Just like every person on your team has a different personality. They have a different background. They have a different set of skills, and so how you deal with a person, and they can also change over time. Or they could, one day just have a bad day. And so how you deal with that really requires agility. And that's why I think, humility is important for a leader, because you don't always have the answer, right? You're not always going to be right. And so, if you show up in a way that you're learning, right? If you have a beginner's mindset, and this is something I was taught in this keynote community I've joined, if you can remain humble and have a beginner's mindset, you'll continue to have that hunger to learn and to be humble in these complex situations, and you do your best in them, and then you learn from it afterwards by being very honest about what did you know. Why did you make a certain decision? Why were certain actions taken? Right? So this is, to me, it's all part of the growth. And uh, the minute you stop learning, as a human, really, you're on the decline.
That word curious, that's we've talked about that in past episodes of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, how important that lifelong curiosity is. And just yeah, I believe it to be such a important. Once you're no longer curious, you've sort of given up on the learning component, and life gets pretty boring and stagnant and static, and leads to decline and those kinds of things. You know, as we were talking about adversity, and our farming audience definitely faces a lot of it. Mother Nature supplying a great bulk of that adversity.
Yes.
I was thinking about like a family business. And we've had guests here that talk about how, you should have your kids before they come back to the family business, family farm, ranch, or any sort of family business. They should work somewhere else, get some other experiences, face, some other ideas, other ways of doing things, just not the way that mom and dad did it. I also thought of the trouble that we can get in where we maybe drop people into situations where it's beyond adversity, or it's beyond like an opportunity to fail. Like you're basically setting them up for failure. Like it's essentially throwing them in the deep end.
Right.
Right. That can really hurt somebody's ability. Like you're not building scar tissue or calluses as a leader. It's actually way more detrimental in terms of somebody's learning. Have you experienced that or seen that at all?
I have. So I think I used the word inoculation before.
Yeah,
And
you did. Yeah.
so when you get a vaccine, what's happening is they're putting a small amount of something bad in you, so your body reacts to it and fights it off.
Yeah.
They're not poisoning you, to the extent that you can't recover.
Yep.
And no different if you're in the gym, right? You wanna gradually push your limit. So when you fail, I don't know, on a bench press, you still have someone there to help get back up, but you're not failing to the point where you're ripping. You're tearing at the micro level, but you're not ripping muscles, right? So, like, I don't think those are analogies to what you described. If you were to throw someone in the deep end, because there's likely going to be some trauma with that, and I mean, trauma is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I've been through some pretty traumatic experiences, but I was inoculated beforehand. And I was built up to be able to do the things I did, especially in combat. So if you want to be smart about it, if you want sustainability, yes, you need to decide who can do it and who can't. And so whatever that standard is, and then you want to build people up, gradually, if you actually want that to be sustainable. But it's amazing, you read some of these stories of survival situations, or what people have done in disasters, and just incredible feats of either physical or moral courage. And were they built that way? Were they built up that way? Like, who knows? How much did they need to recover after the fact? Like these are all things that go into how resilient someone is.
That's interesting. That makes a lot of sense. Do, as I think about this, you've said the word humility a lot, and that's not necessarily a word that I think a lot of people, when they say, "Hey, what is a leader?" or "What is leadership?" It's not a word that first comes to a lot of people's definitions, at least the ones that, if I think if you did some street sort of man on the street sort of candid interviews with people, I'm not sure that word would come up. What happens if the leader doesn't have that trait? What does it look like?
Well, often there's toxicity if they're not humble. There's the cult of personality that comes out. And we see it with a lot of politicians. We see it with the celebrities that or business celebrities.
Yep.
And so now they could be geniuses. They could be, but they're not infallible. And so everything now is resting on that one person. I think if they don't have a lot of humility, they're not going to see their blind spots. They're not going to accept them when they are pointed out. So there's a fragility that comes with it, right? And so you can be like strong like an oak tree, but when a hurricane comes, that oak tree is going to snap.
Yeah. Whereas
the palm tree is going to bend almost right over, and because it's agile. I don't know if a palm tree has humility, but it knows that it can't face everything, and so it does that. Hopefully, that's still a good analogy. So humility allows you to learn. It allows you to have empathy for other people. It allows you to have strong opinions loosely held, and so you can see different perspectives. And in fact, Jim Collins, when he researched his book, it's probably 20 years ago now, Good to Great, of all of those leaders that he showcased, and I know a lot of those companies are no longer in business, right? So you could argue if that's still a good case study, but you wouldn't have recognized any of the names of those leaders. And when he boiled what he called a level 5 leader down to one sentence, he said they have incredible humility and indomitable will. And so those things can go together if the ego is pure, right? Or there isn't this desire for you as the leader to be in the spotlight all the time. Because a humble leader will be a servant leader. They will look after their people. They will ensure that credit goes to those that did the work. They'll ensure there's alignment. And when there's the opportunity to ask for input, they'll do so. Right? Consensus isn't always the best decision approach, but sometimes it is. And having the humility to ask for help, to say, that idea is better. We're going to go with that. I think is really important.
And there's also the ability to be adaptive, right? So there's opportunities to be a leader at work. There's family. There's church. There's kids' activities. There's a lot of different situations that somebody is in. I'm assuming it's a positive if adjusting to the situation, like because sometimes we hear people say, "Oh, he's different at work than he is at the hockey rink," or those kind of. And sometimes people say that kind of negative. Is it important to be adaptive, or should your leadership style carry through in all sort of situations? What's your thought on that? Home versus work and things like that.
I think your beliefs and values should remain consistent. But your traits, or how much of one trait comes out in a particular circumstance versus another, I think is important as well. And so, are you necessarily being two-faced when you're adapting to the situation? Well, it also comes from the intent. Like, why are you doing it? So if you're kind of Machiavellian and you're doing it to deceive, right, that the intent is not pure. But if really you're just adjusting your leadership style to one person who maybe is an extrovert and wants information a certain way, to someone who's an introvert and may want an information a different way, like I just think that that's just maturity, right? So that's the difference between the golden rule and the platinum rule. So the golden rule is treat everyone how you want to be treated. Well, I'm a former Army guy, and I don't think a lot of people want to be treated the way, I wanted to be treated as a soldier, like, because it was hard and harsh.
Yeah.
And so, in the platinum rule is treat people the way they want to be treated. And so I even think there's a fine line there too, right? And so you don't want to be pandering, to every single, snowflake, and every single person who's got a high degree of individuality. At some point, there still needs to be, you're a community for a reason, you're a group for a reason, you have shared values for a reason, and you have a shared culture for a reason. And some people just don't fit in. And so, I guess everything in moderation in terms of either sticking to your guns or being adaptive.
Yeah, but like you said, that number one point you made when it comes to the inner game is that identity, and so that holds true. I think you put that very, very well. Hey, Mark, this has been fantastic. I really do appreciate it. If somebody wants to find out more about what you're doing with Gasparotto Group, how do they find out more information?
Well, they can either look me up online at www.gasparotto.co. I'm sure you'll put that in type. I'm on LinkedIn, and that's where I interact. That's the only place where I interact in terms of social media. So, very happy if people connect and follow me there, because a lot of my thought leadership comes out on that channel.
Great stuff. Well, hey, Mark, thanks so much for joining us here today on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. Really do appreciate it.
John, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
That was a great discussion with Mark Gasparotto on the importance of mastering our inner game for effective leadership. In farming, just as in any business, our ability to navigate complexities and uncertainties hinges on our self-awareness, our emotional intelligence, and accountability. By focusing on our inner game, we can lead ourselves and our teams more effectively, which fosters a culture of resilience and continuous improvement. Mark Gasparotto emphasized that the journey of mastering our inner game involves self-awareness, understanding our strengths and areas for development, and being, most importantly, accountable. These elements are critical not only for personal growth, but also for the growth of our farm businesses. Remember, leadership isn't just about guiding others. It's about understanding and improving ourselves first. Whether we're dealing with the day-to-day operations of the farm or making strategic decisions for the future, our inner game plays a pivotal role. If there's anything that Mark said here today that you have some questions on, have an opinion, maybe some comments, some follow-up, you reach out to me by emailing shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call the Real Ag listener line. It is 855-776-6147. You can find more episodes of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast at mindyourfarmbusiness.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, a big shout out to RBC Royal Bank for being the sponsor of this podcast. Until next time, keep on minding your farm business.